Welcome back. Forbes magazine ranking the most powerful public companies in its annual Global 2000 list. Coming in first place this year, get this, the Industrial and Commercial Bank of China, followed by China Construction Bank, then Berkshire Hathaway, then JP Morgan Chase, and Wells Fargo. We want to bring in the deputy editor of investing at Forbes Media, Halah Touryalai. Halah, good to see you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Of course, thanks for having me.
So go through the system. How do you rank these companies?
Absolutely. So we take a large group of companies. We look at them at 4 metrics. We look at sales, we look at profits, we look at assets, and we look at market value. We assign a score to each one, and then we take a composite and rank those composites. So you end up with our 2000.
It's incredible that Chinese companies are the first 2.
Absolutely. It's been pretty consistent. I mean, China and the U.S. dominate the top 10 and overall just the list. But I think it's pretty reflective of what's just going on in the economy. 2 of them contribute something like 30% of the world's GDP. So it's pretty natural that they'll end up dominating the list.
That makes sense.
Are there any forward-looking metrics taken into consideration, or is this all backward? When is it as of the end of?
Right. So we look at trailing 12 months. It ends beginning of April.
Okay.
The last 12 months.
Okay, because it's interesting to see all those banks on the list when they had a great run since the election in last year, but this year they haven't done so well. So.
Right. You'll also see that on oil and gas. Oil and gas companies on this year's list fell. Exxon fell out of the top 10. And I think you might see an increase maybe next year depending on what happens with oil production.
You know, how much change, how much dynamism is there to the list? Because, you know, I know if we look historically, for instance, I believe at one point just on public market valuation, Japan had, I think, 9 of the 10 largest companies in the world in the 1980s,
right.
Which I don't think it has one even near the top of the list now. So how much churn is there? How much dynamism to the...
It depends year to year. So, for instance, this year you'll see a lot of retail fall off. I mean, Ralph Lauren's no longer on the list. Chipotle's gone for obvious reasons. So there's also mergers and acquisitions that take place. SAB Miller is no longer because of the AB InBev acquisition. You also have Starwood, which was a big one, has been acquired by Marriott, and now Marriott sort of ranked up. So in terms of just changes, it really depends. It's one of 2 things, either acquisitions or this kind of fallen off based on our metrics.
What about big changes, companies that made huge leaps on the list?
Amazon, I mean, that is a big one, right?
Yeah,
for obvious reasons, sure. I mean, profits have soared, market value has soared. They've gone into the top 100 very easily. And on the flip side, a lot of other retailers have either fallen off. Nordstrom and Target have just kind of ended up in the bottom half of the list. But Amazon is the big reason you can see them moving up.
What about tech? So Amazon is kind of a hybrid of tech and retail. Sure. Apple's on the top 10 list, but what about Netflix? What about Google?
Yeah. And then there's Snap.
And Snap.
High-profile American company is Snap. I mean, how does Snap get on this list when you're talking about profitability, you're talking about market share, revenue growth?
Right. I think a lot of it probably has to do with the market value aspect of it. They actually just made the cut. We ended our list in early April, and they IPO'd in March. So $1.3 billion in IPO helped kind of put them in. I mean, it's a respectable debut. There's something around 1,600 or so. So it'll be interesting to see what happens to Snap going forward. At the top, I mean, the dominant companies you have are obviously Apple. Most of the tech top companies are dominated by U.S. companies. You have Samsung in there at number 2 from South Korea. But for the most part, you have Apple, so you have Google, which is now Alphabet. So it's a good roundup.
Do you have a breakdown of tech, financials, et cetera, in terms of sectors?
Yes, absolutely. On our site, we kind of break them down. In financials for U.S., I mean, the top 10 is primarily financials. You have Chinese banks, you have the large U.S. banks like JP Morgan and Wells Fargo. And in terms of tech, you can definitely check those out on our site.
All right, we'll do that. Halah,
yeah,
thanks so much. Halah Touryalai joining us there from Forbes.